Hi. In this screencast I'm going to demonstrate how to draw a bowl and spoon using Inkscape 0.46. I've come to the realization after doing this a couple times that I'm probably using the same 5 or 6 techniques that I seem to always use. So I've kind of come to the realization that if you're looking for how to push the envelope or the boundaries with new features in Inkscape and using all the fancy bits, so to speak, probably Heathen X is your guy, because I watch his stuff and I learn so much about functions and features in Inkscape that I've never even realized were there, but which is good. But unfortunately, Heathen X, I am not going to use any of them, and probably fall back to the same 4 or 5 techniques I seem to use every single time. Anyways, that aside, let's get started here. So I don't have the key status monitor working yet. It's a bit frustrating. Tried again tonight, couldn't get it going. I did send the developer of that a quick email, so hopefully I can get it solved for next time. Hopefully I'll try to use the menus where I can. Like I say, there's probably only 4 or 5 different techniques I'm using, so hopefully it won't be too bad. I'll try to describe things fairly well. So we'll get started here. First thing I will do is change I'm going to change the canvas here to a different color and get rid of the border or the page here. So I'll hit Control-Shift-D. Actually, now I'll hit Control-Shift-D, bring up the document properties, and I will uncheck the page border, and I will click the background, and we'll change it to fully opaque, I don't know, something bluish like this. Okay. Just be working with some white highlights and stuff, and if you do it on a white background, things get lost pretty quickly. So we'll try and work this way and see how it works. Okay, first we're going to draw the spoon, because that's probably the more difficult of the two things to draw. It's actually not too difficult. Hit the circle tool, and we'll just draw whatever kind of oval shape you want. I will hit Control-Shift-F to bring up the fill and stroke dialog box, and I will make that fully opaque for now, just a gray color. We're going to change that around after. And next I'm going to draw a rectangle for the handle. Okay, this is where you're going to pick your first proportions, get it looking the way you want it to look. Say it's something like this, maybe a little narrower, maybe something like that. And I'm going to want a rounded bottom on this, so I will just double click it while it's still a rectangle, go in and grab the corner, give it some kind of radius that I want. Probably I'm going to make it look something like this. So first thing I'm going to do is, just in case, I think I'm going to need these objects again later, separate objects. Put them over here, and I will select them both and bring up the Align dialog box, Object, Align and Distribute. You see, I don't use the menus very much, sorry about that. I always use the keyboard shortcuts. So it's Control-Shift-A, or you can bring it up in the menus like I just did. Make sure they're both aligned, centered, and we will highlight them both and union them. So again, you hit Object, Path, Union. This is going to be tedious. I hope not, but maybe. So here we have our outline of our spoon. Okay. Next thing I will do is I want to create kind of a different shape to this handle a little bit. Okay, I want to get, rather than being just a straight edged rectangle, what I'm going to do is double click it to bring up these nodes, and I'm just going to grab the left 2 and probably spread them out a little bit. So we'll hit the left cursor key maybe once, twice, 3 times, highlight the other 2, hit the right cursor key once, twice, 3 times. Okay, it's a little bit more natural shape. I'm going to save a copy of this, or duplicate this again. with edit duplicate, because I want to use that for my shadow later on. Okay, so we've got our spoon. Next thing I'm going to do is create a kind of beveled edge here on the handle. So again, I'll hit Control D to duplicate it, make it a little different color, bring in the fill and stroke dialog box again, just so we can see when we're changing it here what's happening. So I'll zoom in, select that new object we've created on top. It's a path, so I'll hit Control J, which creates a handle here, and I could do a dynamic offset. Now what I want to do is just offset it slightly so it pulls it in a little bit here. I'm going to hold the Control key, just bring it in a little bit here, so you can see it creates that edge here. Alright, so that's one thing I want to do, and I probably want to make that lighter than the other part a little bit. Something like that. Okay, there we go. Next, I'm going to take this part that we just offset, actually turn it back into a path, because it stays as a dynamic offset. And sometimes that can be slower to move, and it'll throw you a curve later on when you're trying to adjust it. You realize it's not a path, so we'll turn it back into a path and go Object to Path again. Okay, so now we see it's a path. We'll duplicate it, pull it over. Now what I want to do is I want to create kind of a highlight here. I want to create a white kind of brighter area in here. Okay, so what I'll do is I will turn this object into all white, and then I will give it a gradient. So hit the gradient button, and I'll edit the gradient. By default, it's going to give me a white and a transparent stop on the gradient. I'm going to add one more stop. I'm going to go from transparent to opaque, and then transparent again. Okay, so that's my gradient now. I can hit F2 to get the gradient handles. I'm just going to pull one there, hold the Control key, and put another one here somewhere. Okay, now you can get fancier with this by putting additional stops and getting tighter highlights where you want them. For now, just to keep things simple, I'll leave it this way, and maybe I'll just move this peak of the gradient up a little bit, something like this. Okay, again, I'll hit this one in, first, hold Shift, select this highlight we just created, bring in the Align and Distribute dialog box, and align them up. So you get kind of like a metallic looking. This is not going to be completely photorealistic, but it should be good enough for what we're trying to do. Next, I'm going to zoom out a little bit here. I'm going to take that top circle, and we kept it as a circle here, or an oval here, or ellipse. I'll hit Control D to create a duplicate. And what I'm going to do now is I want to create a kind of dark gradient. We're assuming here in this example kind of the light is kind of coming from the top. So what I'll do is create, turn it completely black. I will hit the gradient button again, hit F2, and I don't know if you can hear my cat in the background there. He's taken, he's chosen this time to start meowing. Not sure why. He must love the sound of my voice, just like everybody else. Anyway, so we're gonna hold, click this shape underneath, hold Shift, click the black gradient, and again hit Align and Distribute. Make sure we've got first selected. That's usually what I use, and do that. Now, it's obviously a little too dark, probably. Also, it's the original ellipse shape. I want it to be just inside the spoon. So again, I'm going to actually cheat a little bit here, hold Control Shift, drag one of the corners and just scale it down a little bit. Okay? So that gets our kind of bowl shape. Probably I'll highlight that and just decrease the opacity a little bit. I don't want it to be such a dark difference there. Okay? So there's a little bit more realistic. Another thing you can do is actually take that same gradient and then do something a little different. Increase the opacity a little bit. Now what we're going to do is draw a little path here. I want to get this kind of clipped in a kind of pattern like this. So I'll do something like this. Hit F1 to select it. And I'll double click it to get the nodes. Select all those nodes. Missed one there. And then I will make those nodes symmetric, so I get a nice kind of swoopy curve in there. Okay. I'll select that. Select the gradient underneath. Path intersection. And now again I'm going to put that. Click this one first. Hold Shift. Click the second one. Bring up my Align and Distribute dialog box and align that. Okay. And I will reduce the opacity of that dark spot there. Okay, just to give it a little more shiny look to it. You can also do that here. I found in one practice run that I did that I actually took this white highlight gradient and I kind of clipped it off in a similar kind of swirly pattern, and that gave it a much shinier type of look to it. But it all depends what you want to go for. This is fairly simplistic. One other thing I tried that might help as well is taking this gradient, not the one I clipped but the one underneath, duplicate it, and instead of doing a linear gradient, or in addition to doing a linear gradient, you could actually do a radial gradient. Okay, so here what we'll do is get these dialogues out of the way. We've got our linear gradient, pull it on top, shrink it a little bit, probably move it up a bit. You get more of a bowl shape to it. Okay, now there's our spoon. I'm fairly happy with it. You can kind of dink around with this thing for an hour on its own. We'll just group it together so it doesn't fall apart on us later on. And what I will do next is create the shadow. So to create the shadow, what I want to do is first of all take this object that we're going to use for the shadow. We'll make it black. Okay. And we probably, to make things easier, we'll just decrease the opacity a little bit. In case we move it on top, we want to see where it is. Okay, so it's black, just at partial transparency. It is a path, so I want to create a dynamic offset and just offset it in a touch here. So again, we'll do path, dynamic offset. We get that single handle again. We'll just pull it in, holding the control key a little bit. Okay. Hit Control Shift Z or turn it back, path, object to path, make sure it's a path again. You can bring it up, bring it up top. And I find it's easy just to make sure when you're moving things this way to always work left, right, hold the control key, and then you don't have to worry about lining things up vertically. You just have to pull it to the side. Just be careful it doesn't do this type of thing here. Okay, so that's going to be our shadow underneath. I put it on top because I want to see how it lines up. We want it to be a little bit smaller in the bowl area. The other thing I want to do is when this is supposed to be arching up, this handle, so I want the shadow to show up here more than it does down here, say, for instance. Okay, so what I'll do is double click this path. I'm going to add a couple nodes, one here. Alternatively, we could, that's probably the easiest way. Let's say we select this segment just by clicking somewhere between these two nodes, and we'll click the Insert New Nodes button, click the other side, Insert New Nodes. I want them to be kind of at the same spot. Then I'm going to grab those two, hold the Control key, raise them up a little bit. Okay. Also, when they're selected, make them symmetric nodes. Okay. Now, again, select one. We'll hit the right cursor key twice. 1, 2. And again, here, we'll go left twice. 1, 2. Actually, what I'm going to do is actually raise them up, hold the control key and drag them up a little bit more, because I want the shadow to kind of pop out more where the arch is. Okay. So there we go. There's our basic shadow. So again, now we can make it fully opaque for now. We can leave the blur off for a second here. We'll send it to the back. We'll select our spoon object, hold shift, select our shadow, bring in the align and distribute dialog box and center them. And now we want to select that shadow underneath. So how you select an object underneath another object or a series of objects is hold the Alt key and click, and just watch at the bottom or on this fill and stroke dialog box until you click again with the Alt key. Now we can see we're in the black object. It's the one underneath. So we can blur it. Okay. And what I'd like to do as well is, again, hold the Alt key to get that one underneath. I'm going to use the cursor key and just bring it down a little bit because the light's coming from the top. Now, in order to make it, probably go down a little bit more, like this. Okay, so there's very little shadow up here, which makes sense. There's more shadow here, which makes sense. There's a little more shadow at the arch of the handle, which makes sense. But down here, it's kind of iffy. You could either put, a white highlight gradient here on the end to kind of make it flip up a little bit. In this case, I'll just go the easy route. I want to double-click the shadow, drag those, or select those 4 nodes, and hold Control, and drag them up. So the handle now, the end of the handle's no longer got a shadow under it. Okay, so it means the handles come back down onto the table, so to speak. Alright, one other thing, I'll probably select the shadow again and just reduce the opacity till it looks the way you want. And I'm going to leave it like that. That's a decent looking spoon. I'll group everything together and keep it for later. So you can use that in other projects now. If you wanted to turn it to do something else, it's nice and easy to work with. Okay, now onto the bowl. So what I will do is first take a sip of coffee. Excuse me. Okay. Now we'll create the bowl. It's fairly simple. Oh, shoot. One other thing that I'm going to do both on the bowl and on the spoon is create a quick highlight. Okay, and the way I'll do that is probably we'll try with the star here. You can play around with the star tool to get the look you want. I'll leave it like this, say. I'm going to make it all white, fully opaque for now. Okay. Hit F1 to select it. Now I'm going to take the circle, hold the Control key and draw a circle, slightly larger than this. Something like that. Okay. And highlight them both. Probably just group them together in case we want to separate them later. You could combine them as well. We'll shrink it down a little bit. Put it somewhere on top. And this is kind of optional. I mean, I like to see it, but it may not look realistic enough to you, depending on what you're going for. We'll do something like that, and then probably just blur it a bit like that. Probably look better right at the top. So there's our little shine on the top, or little sparkle. But you could probably make something look a little bit better. And that we'll just group that in as well. Okay. Now onto the bowl. So take the circle tool, hold the Control key, draw a circle. It doesn't matter what size right now. Okay, it doesn't have to match the spoon because we can, great thing about Inkscape is you can just scale the spoon to whatever you want later on, whatever you need. So we can do the same with the plate. So we'll take our circle here. I'm going to bring up the fill and stroke dialog box, change it to slightly off-white just for now. We're going to change these colors around likely. I like to work in grayscales because then I can kind of change the color later on fairly easily. I'll show you what I mean in a minute. So there's the outside of our plate. We'll duplicate that, make it darker, just so we can see it. Hold the Control key and the Shift key and drag the corner in. I want to create the inside of the bowl like this. Got a fairly wide lip on it. Alright, now I want to create some highlights. So what I'm going to do is show you how I create the highlights at the top. I want a little shine here, a little shine on this edge, and a couple shadows, a little bit of shadow down on the lower edges, okay, to give a kind of more realistic look. Again, depends on where you're kind of picking your light source to come from. I pick it straight from the top just because that's easiest for me to draw. But you could do it on the side, you can do things like that, no problem. So what I'll do is to create the highlight, probably easiest if we want just the circle to remain. So we'll duplicate the circle. We'll create it gray. The duplicate will make gray just so we can see it better. Probably also reduce the opacity a little bit. Okay, make it even darker gray. Alright. Next, I'll take this circle and I want to create one more duplicate. Okay, and this duplicate now I'm going to hold Control Shift and make it larger. Okay, something like that. Now, if I hold the Control key and drag this down, you can kind of see, because I've made it semi-opaque, you can see where that is cutting. Okay, so that's cutting around the circle, a nice little kind of thin crescent shape. I want it to be even thinner than that, probably something like that. Now the trick here is to select the first gray one, hold Shift, select the second one, and then do Path, Difference. So I'm left with just that highlight. Okay, so it's just that gray crescent shape that I want. Okay, and probably be a good idea here to make the plate itself, the main plate here, a little bit darker. Take the inside plate, make that even a little bit darker, and then make this highlight full white for now, fully opaque. So you can see there's the highlight on the top of the plate. Now to get the dark highlight on the bottom, very simple, just select this, Control D to duplicate it. You can flip it vertically, drag the second one down, and then you can either align them or just do it by eye like I always end up doing. Like this. The bottom one you can make black. Okay? Now you can highlight both of these, hold Shift, and you can kind of decrease the opacity a little bit and probably add a little bit of blur. Try a blur of 1. It's probably too much, so we'll do 0.4. I don't know, we'll try it. It's a little bit better. We'll decrease the opacity. Now what I find is the white highlights you probably want to leave there. The black highlights you probably want to reduce a little bit further, the opacity. Okay? Maybe even this one we reduce a little bit further. Okay? Now we want to have kind of the opposite of that happening for the circle inside. Now, you could do the same thing. Take this circle, create 2 duplicates, and enlarge it. The cheater's way of doing it, which is my way usually, select both of these, duplicate them, and shrink them. Hold Control and Shift, and you shrink them down. Because we've done everything symmetric, you should be able to get them fairly close to what you want. Okay, so that one's there, that one's there, and now of course we want the white one down here, so while they're both selected still, we'll flip them. Okay, now you might be a little bit off, you might be close enough, you can go in and adjust them a little bit. For me, that's pretty close. Okay, next I'm going to create a little shine up here, probably a same little shine down here. I'm going to do that similar way that we did with the star, except I'll probably just do it a little simpler. I'll take the rectangle tool, hold the Control key, get rid of any filleting, rounded corners. Okay, there's a square. Can't be a rectangle, but a square. Select it a second time, hold the Control key and rotate it 45 degrees. Now I will just pull the top handle down. We want kind of a very shallow diamond shape. Okay? Probably even a little shallower. Like this. Circle tool, hold the control key to create a circle. We want to align these two, so we'll hold them both. We'll bring up the align and distribute dialog, center them this way, center them horizontally. Okay. While they're both selected, we'll make them fully opaque and all white. We'll also group them, hitting Control G. That's really my highlight. Okay, very simple. Arrange it somewhere close to the top here. Probably shrink it a little bit. You can get this to look the way you want. Probably blur it slightly. Again, we'll try maybe the 0.3. Well, maybe we'll go up more. Yeah, somewhere like that. Look good, and you adjust, fine tune where you want it to be. Okay. And again, that's an optional thing. I like the look of it, but it's up to you. You also might want to stretch it out further so that the little tails are shining out a little bit more. You can duplicate it, bring it down, slowing down a little bit here because of the blurring. Probably shrink this one a little bit. And you can also reduce the opacity of them a little bit. So if you just want to highlight them both, you can reduce the opacity a little bit so they don't stand out as much. Okay, so there's my nice shiny plate. Probably, now because these are just white and black highlights with varying opacity, I can change this plate to any color I want. And still get those kind of highlights. Now you may have to do some fine tuning, but we can make it dark gray, down like something like this if we wanted, and you still get the shading up top. The highlights still happen. You could change it to one of these colors here if we wanted. Whatever you wanted to do. Okay. For me, I'll just pick a dark gray, something like this. Okay. And next, I'm going to blur these things a little bit more. They're starting to bug me. Didn't get the top one. There it is. I'm probably going to blur them to 1. A little bit more natural looking. Next, I will do the soup. So, what you could do is take this one way. Soup is nice and easy. You can put whatever you want on the plate. I turned mine into a bowl. I went a little bit darker here first. Okay. And then I select the center circle, I duplicated it again, and I shrunk it a little bit further. And then I put my, I don't know, what do we want? Pea soup. Can't stand pea soup myself, but it's easy to draw. You could go tomato if you wanted to. Something like that. We'll go back to the pea soup. Looks probably better. So there's our pea soup. You can adjust again the size of that thing to make it look good the way you want it. Okay, so there's our basic bowl. Now, to make it look more realistic, I'll do two things. One is I will duplicate this gray shape on top. I'm going to create a, again, kind of highlight across it. So we will create a polygon around it, cutting it across halfway somewhere. Probably give it a little bit of a curve like this. Hit Shift so we select both of them and go Path, Intersection. I will make this thing that we've just created all white, and I will then while it's selected, hit the gradient tool to create a nice shiny gradient. I will reduce the opacity a little bit, and then of course I will take this, hit the page down button, or hit the button up here to lower selection one step, just till it gets underneath, and then bring it up, back up one. Okay, probably I'll reduce the opacity a little bit further to make things a little more subtle. Okay, the last thing I'm going to do is, again, select this main circle that was the basis for our bowl, hit Control D, I'm going to shrink it, okay, center it, I'm going to make it black, and just stretch it down vertically, okay, something like that. All right, maybe I'll make it a little bit bigger, something like that. You can pull it down a little bit. You can play with this all day long. I'm going to blur it, okay, and then I'm going to send it right to the back. So there's kind of the shadow. You also could select it and reduce the opacity a little bit. Probably you want it to be a little more subtle. Something like that. Okay, so there's our bowl of soup. I'm going to highlight everything and group it. I'm going to enlarge the bowl to something more reasonable in size and move it a little bit closer to our spoon. Get rid of that thing we don't need anymore, and see if we can get this to fit the whole screen. We can. There we go. There is our pea soup and our spoon. So I'm not sure how long that was, probably a little bit longer than I wanted, but hopefully you found it useful. Again, sorry to use the same 5 or 6 techniques, but I find them very useful for a variety of things. So hope you like it, and I hope you got some use out of it, and thank you very much for watching.